My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 22, and I'm stumbling through my first year at Northwestern Pritzker School of Law. I live in Evanston, Illinois, where Lake Michigan's calm feels like a shield against Chicago's relentless energy. The university's Gothic architecture, with its stone arches and ivy-clad walls, feels like a promise of wisdom and tradition. But for me, this place is less about academic prestige and more about forging an identity separate from the one assigned to me by my family, the role of the quiet, unremarkable son, a footnote in our family's story. I grew up in Naperville, a suburb that prides itself on its pristine riverwalk, historic homes, and a pervasive sense of manicured success. To outsiders, it's the American dream realized. To me, it was a gilded cage of expectations where I always fell short. My family is a masterclass in surface-level perfection. My father, Mark Cole, is a commercial real estate developer whose worth is measured in square footage and profit margins. He's a man built of sharp angles and even sharper assessments, his eyes constantly appraising everything and everyone for their value. To him, affection was a poor investment. Once, over dinner, he told me flatly, "Sentimentality is a liability, Ethan." His tone as cold as a balance sheet. He was talking about my desire to volunteer at a legal aid clinic instead of seeking a lucrative summer internship. I knew then that my motivations would forever be a foreign language to him. My mother, Sharon Cole, operates in a different but equally demanding sphere. As the director of a high-end art gallery in downtown Chicago, she curates her life with the same meticulous precision she applies to an exhibition. Her hair was honey blonde, her smile rehearsed, her home a museum of minimalist elegance. Sharon's brand of love is conditional, predicated on performance and public perception. Her praise is a rare commodity, usually reserved for my older brother. "Look at Brandon," she'd say, her voice lilting with admiration. "He understands how to make an impact." Brandon, at 28, is the family's crowning achievement. With an MBA from the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business, he's now a celebrated tech founder in San Francisco, his face occasionally gracing the pages of business magazines. To our parents, Brandon is the sun around which the rest of us orbit. He has the sleek Silicon Valley apartment, the international travel schedule, and the carefully crafted narrative of a self-made prodigy. What they refused to see was the strain under his success. I'd heard through a college friend who works in venture capital that Brandon's company was hemorrhaging money, kept alive only by a series of increasingly desperate loans. But in the Cole family, perception is reality. "Ethan, why can't you be more decisive like your brother?" my mother once asked, her disappointment a familiar weight. I just offered a hollow smile, the silence a shield for the words she'd never understand. Then there's my younger sister, Jessica, or Jess, an 18-year-old freshman at DePaul. Jess is a social media virtuoso, effortlessly curating a life of vibrant friendships, trendy Chicago hotspots, and familial bliss. Her Instagram was a gallery of our family's fake happiness, always without me. I once teased her about it. "Hey, why am I never in the family photos you post?" She'd laughed it off with a breezy, dismissive wave of her hand. "Oh, Ethan, you're always buried in a book. We don't want to bother the future legal genius." The subtext was clear. My quiet, academic life didn't fit the aesthetic she was selling. I was a discordant note in her perfectly composed symphony. The one person who ever made me feel seen was my grandmother, Eleanor Cole. She lives by herself in Madison, Wisconsin, in a small, clapboard house that seems to defy the passage of time. Her home, a 2-hour drive from Evanston, is my sanctuary. It smells of dried lavender and old books, and its small garden overflows with wildflowers she insists on tending to herself, even as she approaches her 81st birthday. Grandma Eleanor is a slight woman with hair as white as fresh snow and eyes that hold a deep, unwavering warmth. Since my grandfather, Arthur, passed away 5 years ago, she has lived a solitary but dignified life. "Ethan," she'd often tell me, her hand gently resting on mine, "the only person you need to please is the one you see in the mirror." My fondest childhood memories are of summer afternoons spent at her house. While my parents were networking and Brandon was collecting accolades, I'd escape to Madison. Grandma would tell me stories about Grandpa Arthur, a dedicated public defender whose unwavering belief in justice inspired my own path toward the law. Your grandfather always believed the law wasn't about winning, she'd say, her voice a comforting melody. It was about being a shield for those who had none. In her presence, I wasn't the invisible son. I was simply Ethan, her beloved grandson. But time was fraying the edges of her once formidable mind. Lately, she's been more forgetful. Some days she calls me Arthur. On others, she might ask what year it is. Her memory is a flickering candle, but her body remains strong. She still cooks her simple meals and tends to her flowers, a testament to her resilience. When I raise my concerns with my parents, they are met with a chilling indifference. She's old, Ethan. Old people forget things. My father would say the dismissal sharp and final. My mother would add, she has her pension and the house is paid off. She's perfectly capable of looking after herself. Stop creating problems where there are none. Their words betrayed her, reducing the woman who raised them to nothing more than a ledger entry. This feeling of being forgotten wasn't a new sensation. It was the climate in which I was raised. One Thanksgiving, I brought thoughtful gifts for everyone. A rare first edition for my father's collection, a silk scarf for my mother, a subscription box for Brandon's coffee obsession, and a vintage band t-shirt for Jess. They were opened and met with polite, fleeting thank yous before the conversation immediately shifted back to Brandon's latest funding round. I sat through the entire meal feeling like a ghost at the feast. I've learned not to expect much, to find validation from within. But a part of me always held out hope that one day they would see me, truly see me the way Grandma Eleanor does. She never forgets my birthday. She's the only one who asks about the pressures of law school, my fears, my dreams. But even that connection was becoming strained. The drive to Madison felt longer each time, the demands of my first year. Reading hundreds of pages of case law, preparing for moot court, joining study groups, consuming every available hour. I kept promising myself I'd visit, but weekends would come and go, lost to exhaustion and deadlines. I told myself she was fine, that she was resilient. It was a convenient lie to soothe my own guilt. Everything changed on a crisp October Friday. My phone buzzed with a text from her. It was short, the words slightly jumbled. Ethan, weekend good? I made a cake for the birthday and want you to have some. I froze, a cold dread washing over me. Her birthday, her 81st. I had almost let it slip by. A quick check of my calendar confirmed it was clear of any pressing obligations. I'll be there, Grandma. I typed back, my thumbs trembling slightly. Save me a big slice. I didn't know then that this visit would be more than a simple birthday celebration. It was the precipice of a revelation, the beginning of a storm that would force me to confront the fractured foundation of the family I thought was mine. The 2-hour drive north on I-94 felt less like a visit and more like walking into a storm. The autumn landscape of southern Wisconsin, a patchwork of gold and russet fields under a vast, gray sky, did little to soothe the anxiety coiling in my stomach. Was she really okay? Or had I been willfully blind, choosing to believe the convenient narrative my parents had spun? I'd stopped at a small shop in Evanston to buy her a gift. A beautiful cashmere shawl in a soft shade of blue that matched her eyes. Tucked inside the bag was a framed photo of the two of us from the previous summer, sitting on her porch swing, her head resting on my shoulder. It was a rare moment of pure, unadulterated peace, a memory I clung to. As I turned onto her quiet, tree-lined street on the edge of Madison, the familiar sight of her small, white-clapboard house came into view. The wildflower garden was a riot of late-season color, purple asters, golden black-eyed Susans, and the last of the defiant roses. But an unsettling stillness hung in the air. The house seemed dormant, the windows dark and lifeless. I tried to dismiss the feeling, telling myself she was likely in the back of the house, probably listening to the radio. Parking the car, I walked up the familiar stone path and pushed open the screen door, which creaked in protest. "Grandma, I'm here," I called out, injecting a cheerfulness into my voice that I didn't feel. The silence that answered me was heavy and absolute. I stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of old wood and something else, something faintly sweet and cloying. The living room was exactly as I remembered. The floral armchair, the hand-carved coffee table, and the gallery of family photos on the wall, including several of my parents and brother, smiling their camera-ready smiles. But there was no soft humming, no sound of movement from the kitchen. "Grandma!" I called again, my voice softer now, laced with a growing fear. I found her in the kitchen. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at a lopsided cake with one lonely, unlit candle. She was wearing the faded cardigan she loved, her silver hair pulled back in a loose bun. But it was the look in her eyes that made my heart seize. A vacant, lost expression, as if she were looking at a world only she could see. "Grandma, it's me. Ethan," I said softly, stepping closer. Her gaze shifted, and a flicker of recognition warmed her eyes. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle. "You came." She gestured toward the cake. "I made this, but—" She trailed off, her brow furrowed in confusion. "I can't remember why. Is it a special day?" Her words hit me like a blow. It was her birthday, her 81st, and the memory had been erased. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a smile, sitting down beside her. I gently took her hand. It was cold and delicate, a bird's wing in my own. "It's your birthday, Grandma," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I came to celebrate with you." A fragile smile touched her lips. "Oh, my birthday," she repeated, as if tasting an unfamiliar word. She looked at the cake, then back at me, her eyes clouded with a new question. "But where are the others? Where are Mark and Sharon? And the children?" Her question hung in the silent kitchen. I looked around. The table was set for one. No other cards, no other gifts, no sign that anyone else had remembered or cared. Just my grandmother, her forgotten birthday cake, and me. They're busy, Grandma." I lied, the words tasting like ash. The anger I felt toward my family was a hot, surging tide. "But I'm here. Let's have some cake." We ate in near silence, the old clock ticking on the wall. The cake was dry and overly sweet, but I forced down every bite, the bitterness in my soul overwhelming my senses. After we finished, I cleared the plates, trying to maintain a pretense of normalcy. As I washed the dishes, she spoke again, her voice thin and reedy. "Ethan, have you seen Arthur? He promised he'd be home for my birthday." My grandfather had been gone for 5 years. I turned from the sink, my heart aching. I couldn't bring myself to correct her, to inflict that pain anew. "He's just running an errand, Grandma," I said gently. "He'll be back soon." She nodded, seemingly satisfied, and a profound sense of desolation washed over me. I excused myself and stepped out onto the back porch, the chilly autumn air a welcome shock. I pulled out my phone and dialed my father's number. It went to voicemail. I tried my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and distant. "Ethan, what a surprise. Is everything all right?" "Today is Grandma's birthday," I said, my voice tight, devoid of pleasantries. "I'm here in Madison. She's all alone." "Where are you?" There was a slight pause. "Oh, goodness, is that today?" she said, her tone laced with faux surprise. "We're in Vail. Brandon organized a last-minute family ski trip. The powder is just divine. We tried to call you, but you're always so busy." They were skiing. The excuse was so flimsy, so insulting, it stole my breath. "You didn't think to bring her? Or to at least call her on her 81st birthday?" "Ethan, don't be so dramatic," she chided, her voice turning cool. "Your grandmother doesn't travel well, you know that. Besides, your father sent her a check last week. She's fine. It's wonderful that you're there to keep her company." I hung up before she could say another word, my hand shaking with a rage so intense it felt like a physical illness. A check. As if that could replace presence, love, or memory. I looked back through the window at my grandmother, who was now absently tracing patterns on the tablecloth with her finger, lost in a world I couldn't reach. My family hadn't just forgotten her birthday, they had discarded her. The woman who had been the heart of our family for decades was now an inconvenience, a problem to be managed from a distance. I went back inside and sat down across from her, taking her cold hands in mine. "Grandma," I asked, my voice thick with emotion, "is it okay if I stay with you for a few days?" She looked up at me, a genuine, warm smile finally reaching her eyes. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, "you are such a good boy, just like your grandfather." That night, sleeping on the lumpy sofa in her living room, I listened to the house settle around me. The creaks and groans of old wood, the whisper of the wind outside. This house, once a symbol of love and safety, now felt like a fortress under siege. And I realized, with a chilling certainty, that the battle to defend it and the woman inside it had just begun. I stayed in Madison for the next few days, deferring my law school responsibilities with a vague email to my professors about a family emergency. I couldn't bring myself to leave, haunted by the image of my grandmother alone with her birthday cake. My days fell into a quiet rhythm centered around her needs. We spent mornings in the garden, her hands, though frail, still expertly identifying which plants needed pruning. In the afternoons, we'd sit in the living room while she drifted through memories, recounting stories of Grandpa Arthur with a clarity that would vanish as quickly as it came. But beneath the calm surface, my unease grew. I started noticing small, unsettling details. Unopened mail piled on the hall table, mostly bills and junk mail. Then I found it. A crisp, brown envelope tucked beneath a stack of old magazines. My name wasn't on it, but a gnawing curiosity, disguised as concern, compelled me to open it. Inside were legal documents, purchase agreement, a deed of transfer. My eyes scanned the dense text, my heart hammering against my ribs. The property address was this house. The seller was listed as Eleanor Cole, and the buyer, a couple named David and Karen Peterson. At the bottom of the last page was my grandmother's signature, tremulous and unsteady, but unmistakably hers. And next to it, the bold, authoritative signature of my father, Mark Cole. He had signed as a so-called witness, but it was clear he had pressured her into signing. The world tilted on its axis. I sank into a chair, the papers trembling in my hand. She would never sell this house. It was her life, her history, her sanctuary. This was where she and my grandfather built their life together, where every memory resided. Just then, a sharp, decisive knock echoed through the house. I opened the door to a well-dressed couple in their late 50s. "Hello," the man said with a practiced, professional smile. "I'm David Peterson, and this is my wife, Karen. We're here for the final walkthrough. We take possession of the property next Friday." I stared at them, the papers in my hand suddenly feeling like they were burning my skin. "Take possession?" I repeated, my voice a strangled whisper. "There must be a mistake. This house isn't for sale." David Peterson's smile faltered. He exchanged a look with his wife before producing an identical set of documents from his briefcase. "I don't think so," he said, his tone shifting from friendly to firm. "We signed the contract with Mr. Mark Cole, acting on behalf of his mother. Mrs. Cole signed the deed in our presence. It's all been notarized. We've already paid the full amount. My father, he had orchestrated this. He had taken advantage of her confusion, her trust, and made her sign away her entire world. The ski trip, the dismissive phone call, it all clicked into place. They weren't just neglectful. They were predatory. "Please just wait here," I managed to say, my voice shaking. I closed the door and went to my grandmother, who was now napping in her armchair. I knelt beside her and gently shook her shoulder. "Grandma, I need to ask you something important. Do you remember signing any papers about the house?" She blinked awake, her eyes foggy with sleep. "Papers?" she murmured. Mark was here last week, with some nice people. He said I needed to sign something for my taxes. He said it would help." The cruelty of it left me breathless. I stood up, a white-hot fury eclipsing my grief. I walked back to the door and faced the Petersons. "I am so sorry," I said, my voice dangerously calm. But this contract is void. My grandmother was not mentally competent when she signed this. She was misled about the nature of the document. You cannot take this house. Karen Peterson looked at me with a flicker of sympathy, but her husband's expression hardened. "Young man," he said coolly, "that's a serious accusation. Everything was done by the book. We have a legally binding contract. If you have an issue, you need to take it up with your father. We are scheduled to close and take possession next Friday." They left, and I slammed the door, my fist connecting with the solid wood. 1 week. I had 1 week to undo this monstrous act of betrayal. I immediately dialed my father's number. He answered with an impatient, "What is it, Ethan? The Petersons were just here," I said, my voice low and trembling with rage. "You sold her house out from under her, didn't you? You lied to her, told her it was for her taxes. How could you?" There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold, devoid of remorse. "You don't understand the full picture. Brandon's company is on the brink of collapse. He needed a significant infusion of capital or he'd lose everything. The money from the house was the only way." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "So you sacrificed Grandma to save Brandon? You sold her home, her only security, to bail out his failing business? It's not a sacrifice. It's a practical solution," he snapped, his voice rising for the first time. "She can't manage that house anymore. We were going to move her into a very nice assisted living facility. This is what's best for the entire family." "The entire family?" I shot back, laughing a bitter, broken laugh. "Is Grandma not part of that family anymore? Am I not? Or do we only count when we're not an inconvenience to your perfect plans? You need to grow up and see how the world works," he said, his voice returning to its icy calm. "This is done. Don't interfere." He hung up. I stood in the silent living room, shaking. I tried my mother, my sister, my brother. No one answered. They were all in on it, a conspiracy of indifference and self-preservation. I was utterly alone. I sank onto the sofa, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I looked over at my grandmother, now sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the fact that her own son had just made her homeless. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The quiet, invisible son was gone. The law wasn't just an academic pursuit anymore. It was a weapon, and I was going to use it to protect the only person in my family who had ever protected me. My father had told me not to interfere. He was about to find out how wrong he was. The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. I drove back to Evanston, settled Grandma into my cramped studio apartment, and threw myself into building a case. I met with my civil procedure professor, Anya Sharma, a sharp, compassionate woman who listened to my story with grim intensity. "What your father did is a classic case of elder financial abuse and undue influence," she said, her eyes steely. "If you can prove your grandmother lacked the contractual capacity at the time of signing, a judge will void the sale. But Ethan, this will be a war. Suing your own family is a scorched earth tactic." "They've already burned the ground," I replied. Professor Sharma guided me, helping me draft the necessary legal motions and connect with a pro bono legal aid society for official counsel. While I worked side by side with them, determined to tell our story in court myself. My first step was gathering evidence. I obtained a sworn affidavit from Dr. Evans, Grandma's geriatrician in Madison, detailing her diagnosis of progressing dementia and his medical opinion that she was incapable of understanding complex legal documents. Next, I visited Mrs. Gable, Grandma's next-door neighbor for 40 years. She tearfully recounted how my father had rushed through the visit with the Petersons, repeatedly telling his confused mother, "Just sign here, Mom. It's just paperwork." I reached out to Karen Peterson. To my surprise, she agreed to speak with me. "Your grandmother seemed so confused that day," she admitted over the phone, her voice heavy with guilt. "She kept asking my husband if he was her son, Brandon. We felt uneasy, but your father assured us she was just having an off day." She agreed to testify to this in court. Armed with this evidence, I filed an emergency petition to halt the sale and a lawsuit against my father, naming my mother and Brandon as co-defendants, alleging fraud, undue influence, and breach of fiduciary duty. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My father left a furious voicemail, calling me an ungrateful, delusional brat who was tearing the family apart. My mother sent a tearful, manipulative text. "How could you do this to us? You are destroying your brother's future over an old house." Jess blocked me on all social media. Brandon sent a one-line email. "I hope you're proud of yourself." Because of the emergency injunction, the court set a hearing within days. Standing in the sterile, imposing courtroom in Madison, I felt a strange sense of calm. My parents sat at the opposing table with a high-priced lawyer, their faces masks of cold indignation. As I laid out my case, presenting the medical records, the neighbor's testimony, and Karen Peterson's reluctant account, I avoided looking at them. I focused on the judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s. The most difficult part was putting my grandmother on the stand. I had prepped her as gently as possible, but her memory was a minefield. My father's lawyer was merciless, trying to twist her words and portray her as lucid and willing. "Mrs. Cole," he began condescendingly, "you love your grandson Brandon, don't you? You would want to help him if he was in trouble, wouldn't you?" "Of course I love Brandon," she said, her voice small. "But Arthur, my husband Arthur, he always said the house was my nest, to keep me safe." Then the judge turned to her. "Mrs. Cole," she asked gently, "do you want to sell your home?" Grandma Eleanor looked directly at her, and for a moment, the clouds of her confusion seemed to part. She clutched the small purse in her lap and said with heartbreaking clarity, "No, that is my home. It's where my memories are. I don't want to go." That was the moment the case turned. In her ruling, the judge was unequivocal. She voided the contract of sale, citing overwhelming evidence that Eleanor Cole lacked the capacity to consent. She barred my father from managing her affairs and granted me temporary guardianship of her estate. I had won. As we walked out of the courthouse, my parents brushed past me without a word, their faces pale with fury and defeat. I felt no triumph, only a profound, aching sadness for the family I had lost, and an overwhelming wave of relief for the one person I had saved. The drive back to my grandmother's house was a quiet, surreal journey. The legal victory felt less like a celebration and more like the aftermath of a devastating earthquake. The familiar landscape of my life irrevocably altered. I had saved her home, but I had shattered my family. When we arrived, I helped her out of the car and walked her up the stone path. As she stepped over the threshold, a visible wave of relief washed over her. She touched the familiar floral wallpaper in the hall, her fingers tracing the patterns as if reconnecting with an old friend. "We're home, Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Grandma," I said, my own voice tight. "We're home." In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't return to law school, not yet. I couldn't leave her here alone. I called Professor Sharma and explained that I would be taking a leave of absence. "You did more to uphold the spirit of the law these past few weeks than many lawyers do in a lifetime," she told me, her voice full of warmth. "School will be here when you're ready. Take care of her." My life found a new, quieter rhythm in Madison. I became her full-time caregiver. We spent our days gardening, looking through old photo albums, and listening to the classical music she loved. Some days were good, filled with moments of startling clarity where she was my witty, wonderful grandmother again. Other days were harder, as she slipped into the fog of her past, calling me Arthur and asking when our children would be home from school. I learned not to correct her, to simply enter her world and keep her company there. The silence from my family was absolute. They had excised me from their lives as cleanly as a surgeon removing a tumor. I saw through a friend's social media that Jess posted a smiling family portrait from a recent holiday. My parents and Brandon, perfectly posed. I wasn't in it. It was as if I had never existed. The pain was a dull, constant ache, but it was overshadowed by the quiet purpose I had found. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Grandma turned to me, her eyes lucid and bright. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you," she said softly. "You have his strength, his heart." Tears welled in my eyes. "I just did what was right, Grandma. You and Grandpa taught me that." She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "You are a good boy, Ethan Cole. Never forget that." I knew our time together was finite, that her memories would continue to fade like photographs left in the sun. But as I sat there, holding her hand, I understood something profound. Family isn't about blood or appearances. It's about who shows up, who protects you, who remembers you when the rest of the world forgets. My family may have deemed me invisible, but here, in this small house filled with love and fading memories, I had never been more seen. I had lost a family, but I had found my home, and that's where I'll leave it. What do you think? Was I right to stand up for my grandmother, even if it meant breaking from my family? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next tale of karma and justice.